Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, and I just want to give some final thoughts here on the NBA Summer League in Vegas that just wrapped up. The Miami Heat ended up winning the championship over the Memphis Grizzlies. Ultimately, these were the two best teams, it seemed like, for the entirety of Summer League, and it was really exciting to see, especially some of these young prospects for both teams be able to, fully, I wouldn't say fully develop by any means, but you look at Kel'el Ware, who had a great showing so far, the 15th overall pick. He was really impressive for them, but, I was really impressed by the Grizzlies, who end up being the runner-ups in this, but they had just a number of players that were getting real NBA playing time last season. The Grizzlies were very much diminished by a number of injuries to different starters. You can just go down the list, and basically every one of their best players were hurt, but getting guys like G.G. Jackson and Scottie Pippen Jr., even if you want to throw in the likes of like a Trey Jemison, who was playing for them last year in the NBA because they kind of had to. And I talked about this before on the show as it was happening. I was kind of addicted to the Grizzlies to some degree because they were not good. They lost the majority of their games. I think they won something like 23 games on the year, but they were just playing extremely hard every single game. They made things interesting way more than they should have, and I thought it was cool that they were able to sort of incorporate some of those guys that were a part of that team from last year that, granted, they are still very unproven, but you could have gotten a guy like G.G. Jackson, who made the second team for rookies last year and ended up being, a pretty efficient scorer, to have him buy into playing for the Summer League. And ultimately, I talked about it before on the show. I thought he was really impressive. There were moments that, he did, I wouldn't say fully struggle, but they talked about, Taylor Jenkins at least talked about on the broadcast, how they were trying to get him to not buy in more defensively, but take on more responsibilities, understanding that when he ends up going into next season, that he's going to have a very different role than he got during his rookie year, because of the fact that there's going to be a number of better, more NBA, more experienced scorers ahead of him, such as Marcus Smart or John Morant or Desmond Bane, and that it's going to be harder for him to sort of carve out those minutes for himself, especially if he is not a good defender. So I like the growth that we saw there. Scottie Pippen Jr. as well was also probably their best player. You could make an argument as well. He at least was last night in the championship game. But, again, sorry, Heat fans, if you're out there and you were hoping to hear more about, the Heat on this side of this. Ultimately, Ware was good. I thought that Pele Larson, they kept talking about on the broadcast about the fact that, anything was a surprise from the offensive end side of the floor, and that, he's going to be viewed more as a defender, which is interesting because when I watched him at Arizona, I thought he already was a very good scorer, and I was almost maybe sleeping on his defense a little bit. So he's someone that could end up being a very good two-way player for the Heat. You just feel like almost anybody in that organization has a chance at least to become a random role, guy off of the bench that goes out and gets results for the Heat, because that's what they consistently do with a lot of these sort of lesser known players. And really not too much else to say about it. The game was cool, went to overtime and everything. I don't mind the target score during the exhibition games, but I feel like they kind of should work on that. I would have preferred probably a timer against in that overtime, but regardless, not that deep. I did want to go back and I ran through the history of the Summer League a little bit just to look to see if there was any sort of a pattern or anything worth it to, some of these awards and such. The reality is, out of the champions of Summer League, there isn't much to it. Out of the last 10 Summer League champions, only 2 of the finals MVPs were legitimate rotational players, which was Brandon Clark in 2019 and Kyle Kuzma in 2017. So there wasn't much of a pattern. I was running through a bunch of those rosters and trying to see if there was anything to it, and I wasn't really able to. I think there was a lot more extensive of a history in terms of the overall Summer League MVPs, and the majority of them are actually legitimate NBA players. I believe they started giving out the award in 2006, and the majority of the MVPs actually did have real NBA careers. Out of 18 winners, I would say that all but 2 would be considered NBA successes. I include guys that had, 10 plus years of a career, even if they were never a dominant player. But you look at Randy Foye, who won it in 2006, I think it was, Nate Robinson, Jared Bayless. They're all successes to me, considering the fact that they played in the NBA for 10 plus years. And maybe there is less guarantees on some of the more recent winners. Davion Mitchell, who the Kings just moved off of this offseason, was a lottery pick for them in 2021, so we'll see there. But Cam Thomas as well was co-MVP, I think, that same year as Mitchell. Cam Whitmore won it last season, and I have a lot of faith in him long term. All 3 of those guys could definitely be real rotational players that could be in the NBA for a while. There are some very notable names in terms of Blake Griffin, John Wall, and Damian Lillard. This year's MVP was Jalen Wilson, who plays on the Brooklyn Nets, averaged 21.8 points per game and 4.6 rebounds per game. Good efficiency, 55% from the field and from the three-point line. It was kind of weird how he was the MVP, but he wasn't even on the first team, which, I gotta be honest, I don't know if I was 100% even aware of the fact that they did first and second teams for this. But the first team consisted of Gigi Jackson, Jordan Miller of the LA Clippers, who had a big time emergence, Scottie Pippen Jr., Reed Shepherd, Khalil Ware. The second team was Jalen Wilson, along with Bub Carrington, Jaime Jaquez Jr., Jarris Walker, and Donovan Clingan. So kind of interesting that Wilson ends up, again, not even making first team, winning the MVP, and whether or not that could be a sign of anything, because I really liked Wilson when he was at Kansas, was a veteran presence there. He was always a reliable bucket getter. He ended up going late in the second round in 2023 for the Nets, and I'm just curious to see whether or not he could turn into something. He had a pretty pro-ready game, and he was pretty good in the Summer League last year, but struggled to get real playing time on a Nets team that wasn't very good. Now they are definitely in a different sort of mode now where they trade Mikal Bridges. They have their own first-round picks, so they don't really have to worry about winning games quite as much. He got 15 minutes per game last year. I'd like to think that sees some sort of an increase this year, but obviously no guarantees there. But, ultimately, Summer League's a fun thing, and it can help you sort of, if you were high on somebody beforehand, it can just sort of reaffirm, or on both spectrums, where if you don't like the player and they play bad, then you can just sort of reaffirm your own beliefs. But we don't really know anything until we actually get to see these guys in the NBA. So that being said, I do want to look into all of the lottery picks from this past 2024 draft and give out grades solely based off of Summer League performances, and just run through all 14 picks and give out letter grades. So we will be doing that after this quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.